Hi, my name's Ted, and I'm going to be talking about how pollution affects human life and how it's something that affects us every single day. However, we don't really think about it. And by the end of this, I think that you'll never look at the air you breathe and the water that you drink in the same way. So, this is a table of contents. I'll be talking about air pollution, wildfires, plastic and trash, water, why this matters, ethics, and a case study at the end. So let's start with air pollution. So what actually is it? So according to the World Health Organization, air pollution is when contaminants such as smoke, dust, gas, or vapor builds up in the atmosphere at levels that are harmful to our health. There are a lot of pollutants out there. However, the most concerning ones are particulate matter, carbon monoxide, ozone, nitrogen dioxide, and sulfur dioxide. The most dangerous out of these are fine particulate matter because these particles are so tiny that they can pass through your lungs directly into your bloodstream and travel to your organs. Next are wildfires. So you might think that wildfires might only affect a small amount of people that live near the fire. However, according to the EPA, wildfires can actually wildfire smoke can actually travel hundreds to even thousands of miles. So even if you live for example in California and a fire starts in Nevada, you could still be breathing the smoke from Nevada. Health effects could also span from small effects such as coughing, runny nose. How, However, they could also reach like heart disease or even premature death. And researchers use an app called Lumin, Lumosity, Lumosity to study smoke's effect on focus and the the results were that just from a few hours of smoke exposure that the people's attention spans were noticeably decreased. So wildfires aren't just an environmental issue, but affects how we think and function every day. Next is plastic and trash. So this one is because most of us interact with plastic every single day without thinking about it. But research shows that 99% of plastic is made from fossil fuels, and just making plastic releases over 170 toxic chemicals into the air and water, and those chemicals are linked to cancer, nerve damage, and reproductive harm. And it doesn't just stop after like the factory, but when we use plastic products, we're ingesting and inhaling tiny plastic particles called microplastics. These have been found in our food, drinking water, and even the air everywhere. And once they're in your body, they cause inflammation and damage to our cells. And they're also linked to serious diseases like cancer and diabetes. Also, like the when we try to trash plastic, we also like one way is to burn it, and from burning it, multiple toxic gases are released. So while the plastic is being made, used, or thrown away, it's always impacting our health. And now water. Water, like clean water, is something most of us take for granted. You can like turn on the tap and it's just there. However, globally, 2.2 billion people didn't have access to safe drinking water in 2022. And it's not just an inconvenience because contaminated water kills around 1.4 million people every year. And when water gets polluted by chemicals such as pesticides, fertilizers, or metals, drinking it can cause cancer, hormone problems, brain damage, and heart disease. And researchers estimate that an average person swallows around zero point 0.1 to 5 grams of microplastics every single week from just water and seafood. And inside the body, those particles are causing inflammation and disturbing our cells' functions. So why should this matter to any of us? So the problem is that pollution isn't something that is just happening far away. It happens to us when we're walking to class, when we're drinking water, and from the food we eat, and all of it's part of a system. And according to the United Nations Environment Program, in 2012 alone, 23% of all deaths worldwide, around 12.6 million people, were linked to environmental causes. And it's not affecting people equally, because around 90% of deaths happen in low to middle income countries, and pollution affects the poorest and most vulnerable people the most. And the choices that we make about energy, plastic use, and are going to determine whether these numbers become better or worse. Now I want to talk about something that doesn't get brought up enough, and that's the ethics of who pollution actually affects. So it's a reality that pollution doesn't affect people equally, and there's a term for this called environmental racism. So it describes how communities of color and low income communities are consistently placed closer to polluting industries, toxic waste sites, and other hazards. And it's not by accident, but usually on purpose. So studies shown that people of color are nearly twice as likely to live right next to an industrial facility, and and it also shows that there's also been research that shows that fines for violating environmental laws are lower in communities of color. And it shows how corporations can abuse this and financially benefit from polluting these neighborhoods rather than in wealthier ones. And it shows how it's a human right issue. And as future voters, workers, and leaders understand this, it's an important part of our society. So let's take a real example about a case study in New York City. So in 1953, 1963, and 1966, these were all years that in New York City there was issues with the environment, and the air caused so many people to die. However, today in New York City, they completely turned things around, and by switching thousands of buildings to cleaner heating oils and converting taxis to cleaner fuels, New York City has cut down its sulfur dioxide pollution by 96% and fine particle pollution by 30% in under a decade. And this shows how it's changeable. And New York City now has a goal to have the best air quality of any large US city by 2030. So it shows how if the government actually tries, it's possible. And to conclude my presentation, air pollution, wildfires, plastic, and water pollution all lead to the same place, our bodies and our health. And it's very unfair how it's not hitting everyone equally, and some communities have to face the environmental issues, and it affects their health really badly. And New York City, how they changed, shows how change is very possible, and our generation decides what happens to the environment.